There's a particular kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones after a night of poor sleep. You know the feeling. Your alarm rings and you're already defeated before your feet hit the floor. The room seems dimmer somehow, even with morning light streaming through the windows. Your head feels stuffed with cotton. Your thoughts move like they're pushing through molasses, and there's this bone-deep weariness that no amount of coffee seems to touch. But here's what makes it truly insidious: the hunger. That gnawing, relentless appetite that appears from nowhere, demanding attention with an urgency you can't quite explain. You ate dinner last night. You're not running a marathon today. Yet your stomach feels like an empty pit, and your mind keeps circling back to food with a single-minded focus that feels almost foreign to you. This isn't coincidence, and it's not weakness. What's happening inside your body when you're sleep-deprived is a cascade of biological changes so profound, so far-reaching that they fundamentally alter three of the most basic aspects of human existence: how much you want to eat, how much energy you have to navigate your day, and how well you can control your impulses and make rational decisions. Tonight, we're going to pull back the curtain on what poor sleep actually does to your body and brain. We're going to explore the intricate connections between hunger hormones that go haywire, energy systems that sputter and fail, and control mechanisms that simply give up. And perhaps most importantly, we're going to understand why these three things, hunger, energy, and control, form a triangle of dysfunction that makes sleep deprivation one of the most powerful saboteurs of optimal health. The hunger awakens when your body's appetite signals go rogue. Let's start with the hunger, because it's usually the first thing people notice. You've probably experienced this yourself. After a terrible night of sleep, food becomes an obsession, not the gentle reminder of, "Oh, I should probably eat something," that you might feel on a normal day, but an urgent, demanding craving that won't be silenced. There's real science behind this phenomenon, and it begins with two hormones that most people have never heard of: leptin and ghrelin. These are the puppet masters of your appetite, the invisible hands that control whether you feel satisfied or starving. And when you don't sleep, they become dangerously imbalanced. Think of leptin as your body's satiety messenger. It's produced by your fat cells, those energy storage depots that everyone loves to hate. And its job is elegantly simple. When you have enough energy stored, leptin travels through your bloodstream to your brain and whispers, "We're good here. You can stop eating now." It's the feeling of fullness after a satisfying meal, that gentle contentment that lets you push your plate away and move on with your day. Ghrelin, on the other hand, is leptin's antagonist. Juiced primarily in your stomach, ghrelin is the hunger hormone, the biological alarm that rings when your energy stores are running low. When ghrelin levels rise, you feel that unmistakable pull toward food. Your stomach might rumble. Your mind starts cataloging what's in the refrigerator. Food becomes interesting, appealing, necessary. In a well-rested body, these two hormones exist in a careful balance, a biological seesaw that tips one way when you need food and the other way when you've had enough. But here's where sleep deprivation throws a wrench into this elegant system. Research conducted at the University of Chicago revealed something striking when they brought 12 healthy young men into their sleep laboratory. These weren't people with any health problems, no obesity, no metabolic disorders, just regular guys with normal sleep patterns. The researchers gave them 2 nights of restricted sleep, allowing them only 4 hours in bed. Then, in a separate session weeks later, they allowed the same men to sleep for a full 10 hours. The difference in their hormone levels was dramatic. After just 2 nights of sleeping only 4 hours, leptin levels dropped by 18%. Think about that for a moment. Nearly a fifth reduction in the hormone that tells your brain you're satisfied, that you've had enough food. At the same time, ghrelin levels shot up by 28%. The hunger hormone nearly doubled its signal strength, essentially screaming at these men to eat. This wasn't a subtle shift. This was a full-scale hormonal rebellion. And here's the truly fascinating part. The men's actual caloric intake had been carefully controlled throughout the study. They weren't eating more or less than usual. They weren't exercising differently. The only variable that changed was their sleep. Yet their bodies responded as if they were in the middle of a famine, desperately sending signals to find food, to eat more, to store more energy. When the pool, researchers asked these men to rate their hunger levels. The results matched perfectly with their hormonal chaos. After sleeping only 4 hours, hunger ratings increased by 24%. More importantly, their appetite for specific types of food shifted dramatically. Foods high in carbohydrates became far more appealing. Sweets, cookies, candy, and cake. Their desire for fruits, vegetables, and dairy products barely budged. The sleep-deprived brain wasn't just hungry, it was hungry for specific types of food, the kind that provide quick energy but often contribute to weight gain and metabolic problems. This pattern has been confirmed again and again in subsequent studies. At Uppsala University in Sweden, researchers took 44 healthy adults and subjected them to 1 night of total sleep deprivation. The next morning, they measured fasting blood samples and found remarkably similar results. Leptin levels had dropped, ghrelin levels had risen, and this imbalance was particularly pronounced in certain groups. Women experienced a more dramatic drop in leptin after sleep loss compared to men. People with obesity showed a stronger increase in ghrelin. The specific numbers varied, but the pattern held. Sleep deprivation disrupts the delicate balance of appetite hormones. But understanding the mechanics is one thing. What does this actually feel like in real life? Imagine you're at work after a bad night of sleep. It's mid-morning, and you already had breakfast a couple of hours ago. A reasonable breakfast, one that would normally hold you until lunch. But your stomach is growling. Not gently rumbling, actively growling. You try to focus on your computer screen, but your mind keeps wandering to the break room where someone brought in donuts this morning. You told yourself you wouldn't eat them. You don't even particularly like donuts. But suddenly, inexplicably, those donuts are all you can think about. The sweetness, the soft dough, the little burst of sugar that promises to make you feel better, at least for a moment. This is ghrelin at work. This is the 28% increase in your hunger hormone, combined with the 18% decrease in your satiety hormone. Your willpower isn't weak. Your biology is compromised. And it gets worse. Studies using functional brain imaging, those advanced scanners that can watch your brain in real time, have shown that sleep deprivation doesn't just make you hungrier. It changes which parts of your brain respond to food. When well-rested people look at pictures of food, their prefrontal cortex, that rational, decision-making part of the brain, shows strong activity. This is the part of your brain that can evaluate whether eating something is a good idea, whether you're actually hungry or just bored, whether that donut fits into your nutritional goals. After sleep deprivation, that prefrontal activity diminishes. Instead, more primitive parts of the brain light up like a Christmas tree. The amygdala, which processes emotional salience and reward, becomes hyperactive. The insular and the orbitofrontal cortex, regions associated with pleasure and hedonic responses, show increased activity. Your brain essentially shifts from rational evaluation mode to give me that now mode. Researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, demonstrated this beautifully in a neuroimaging study. They took 23 healthy adults and scanned their brains while showing them images of food. Everything from healthy options like fruits and vegetables to unhealthy options like pizza and donuts. They did this once after a normal night of sleep and again after 24 hours of total sleep deprivation. The results were stark. After sleep deprivation, when participants viewed unhealthy, high-calorie foods, activity in the frontal cortex and insula decreased significantly. These are the regions responsible for complex judgments and control. Meanwhile, activity in the amygdala increased. The pleasure and reward centers of the brain became more responsive to high-calorie food cues, while the control and evaluation centers became quieter. And this translated into real-world choices. When participants were asked to rate how much they wanted to eat each food, their desire for high-calorie foods increased significantly after sleep deprivation. More tellingly, when they were then allowed to actually choose what to eat, the sleep-deprived participants consistently selected higher calorie options and larger portions. This isn't just about feeling hungrier. This is about your brain's entire approach to food being fundamentally altered by lack of sleep. The rational part of your brain that normally helps you make good nutritional choices gets dimmed while the emotional, reward-seeking parts get amplified. You're not just fighting hunger, you're fighting a brain that has temporarily reprioritized immediate gratification over long-term health. One study at Uppsala University took this a step further by having participants go food shopping after either a normal night of sleep or total sleep deprivation. The sleep-deprived shoppers didn't just buy more food. They bought significantly more high-calorie items, even though the researchers had standardized their hunger levels by giving everyone a standardized meal before shopping. It wasn't hunger that drove the increased purchases. It was the way sleep deprivation had altered their brain's response to food cues in their environment. Think about what this means for daily life. When you're sleep deprived, simply walking past a bakery becomes a test of will. The smell of fresh bread or pastries doesn't just register as pleasant. It becomes almost irresistible because your brain is processing those sensory cues differently. Your amygdala is flagging that smell as highly important, as something that must be investigated and potentially consumed, while your prefrontal cortex, which might normally remind you that you just ate breakfast and don't need a croissant, is operating at reduced capacity. The studies examining this phenomenon have controlled for so many variables that the conclusion becomes inescapable. Sleep deprivation directly alters your hormonal signals for hunger and satiety, and it simultaneously changes how your brain responds to food at a fundamental neural level. You're not just hungrier, you're biologically different in your relationship to food. Your body is sending stronger hunger signals while simultaneously weakening your ability to resist those signals. This creates a particularly vicious cycle. Sleep deprivation increases hunger and desire for high-calorie foods. Eating more high-calorie foods can lead to weight gain. Weight gain can lead to sleep apnea and other sleep disturbances. Those sleep disturbances perpetuate the hormonal imbalances that started the whole cycle. Round and round it goes, each component reinforcing the others. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of this hormonal chaos is how invisible it is. When you're sleep-deprived and standing in front of your refrigerator at 10 p.m., eating ice cream directly from the container, you don't feel your leptin levels dropping or your ghrelin levels rising. You just feel hungry. You might even feel a bit guilty, wondering why you can't just exhibit some self-control. But the reality is that your body has chemically set you up to fail. Your appetite regulation system, That elegant biological balance that normally keeps your food intake in check has been thrown into disarray by something as simple and as complex as not getting enough sleep. And here's something that makes it even more challenging. These hormonal changes don't announce themselves with obvious symptoms. You won't feel your leptin dropping. You won't sense your ghrelin rising. You'll just notice that you're hungrier than usual, that food seems more appealing, that your willpower around eating feels mysteriously depleted. Unless you understand what's happening at the hormonal level, you might attribute these feelings to personal weakness, to a lack of discipline, to anything except the real culprit, your sleep-deprived biology. The research on this is remarkably consistent across multiple studies, different populations, and various sleep deprivation protocols. Whether it's total sleep deprivation, staying up all night, or partial sleep restriction, getting 4 or 5 hours instead of 7 or 8, the pattern holds. Leptin goes down, ghrelin goes up, hunger increases, and food choices shift toward higher calorie options. The magnitude of the effect might vary slightly between studies, but the direction is always the same. What makes this particularly relevant for anyone interested in optimal health, weight management, or metabolic wellness is that chronic partial sleep restriction is incredibly common in modern life. Most people aren't staying up all night, regularly, but millions of people sleep 5 or 6 hours per night, night after night, week after week. They're essentially subjecting themselves to a chronic state of hormonal disruption, a persistent imbalance in their appetite regulation that makes healthy eating exponentially more difficult. And it compounds. One night of poor sleep might increase your hunger by 24% and shift your food preferences toward high-calorie options. But what about a week of sleeping only 5 hours? What about months or years of chronic sleep restriction? The research suggests that these effects don't just persist. They may worsen over time as your body's regulatory systems become increasingly dysregulated. This isn't about blaming sleep for every nutritional choice. We all make decisions about what to eat, and those decisions involve complex factors including taste preferences, cultural influences, economic constraints, and personal values. But what the research on sleep and appetite, hormones reveals is that we're not making those decisions on a level playing field. When you're well rested, your biology supports healthy eating. Your satiety signals work properly. Your brain's control centers can evaluate food choices rationally. Your hormones maintain the balance that makes it easier to eat until you're satisfied, then stop. When you're sleep deprived, all of that support gets yanked away. Your satiety signals are muted. Your hunger signals are amplified. Your brain's control centers are compromised, and your emotional reward centers are hypersensitive to food cues. You're trying to make healthy choices while swimming upstream against your own biology. It's not impossible, but it's enormously more difficult. This is why sleep deprivation and obesity are so strongly linked in population studies. It's not just that tired people move less, though that's certainly part of it. It's that poor sleep fundamentally alters the hormonal and neural systems that regulate appetite, making overeating more likely even when people are trying to eat appropriately. The hungry, sleep-deprived brain is fighting a battle on 2 fronts: increased hunger signals coming in and decreased control mechanisms for managing those signals. The energy crisis. Why sleep deprivation leaves you running on empty. Now, let's talk about the second piece of this triangle: energy. Because even if you could somehow maintain perfect eating habits despite the hormonal chaos of sleep deprivation, you'd still be facing a fundamental energy crisis that affects every waking moment of your day. Energy is such a basic concept that we rarely think about it deeply. We just know when we have it and when we don't. But at the cellular level, energy is a precise, measurable thing. It's called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and it's the molecular currency that powers essentially everything your body does. Every muscle contraction, every nerve signal, every thought in your brain requires ATP. Your body is constantly breaking down ATP to release energy, then rebuilding it to store energy for future use. It's a cycle that runs continuously, every second of every day. Sleep plays a crucial role in this energy cycle, particularly in your brain. During waking hours, as your neurons fire and process information, they consume enormous amounts of ATP. Your brain, despite being only about 2% of your body weight, uses roughly 20% of your total energy. It's metabolically expensive to think, to remember, to process the constant stream of sensory information pouring in from your environment. As ATP breaks down to release energy, it produces a byproduct, adenosine. This isn't just waste material. Adenosine is a neuromodulator, a chemical messenger that accumulates in your brain throughout the day. As adenosine levels rise in key brain regions, particularly in an area called the basal forebrain, it begins to promote sleepiness. It's like a biological battery, gauge, slowly indicating that your energy reserves are depleting and that you need sleep to restore them. Here's where it gets fascinating. Adenosine doesn't just make you feel sleepy, it actually changes how your neurons function. When adenosine binds to specific receptors on neurons, particularly A1 adenosine receptors, it reduces neural activity. It's as if your brain is telling certain regions to slow down, to consume less energy, to prepare for the restoration that sleep brings. This is why caffeine works as a stimulant. It blocks adenosine receptors, preventing adenosine from binding and thus preventing that signal to slow down. Your neurons keep firing at a higher rate, and you feel more awake and alert, at least temporarily. But here's the problem. Blocking adenosine receptors with caffeine doesn't actually reduce adenosine levels. The adenosine is still there, still accumulating. The caffeine is just preventing your brain from sensing it. When the caffeine wears off, all's halter. That accumulated adenosine suddenly floods back into action, binding to its receptors en masse. This is why the caffeine crash feels so brutal. It's not just returning to baseline tiredness. It's experiencing the full weight of all the adenosine that had been building up while the caffeine was blocking the signal. During normal, healthy sleep, adenosine levels drop. The energy-consuming activities of waking consciousness decrease. ATP can be replenished. Metabolic waste products can be cleared away. The brain, in essence, gets a chance to recharge its batteries. This isn't just a metaphor. Studies using magnetic resonance spectroscopy have shown that ATP levels in the brain do indeed change with the sleep-wake cycle, declining during waking hours and recovering during sleep. When you don't get enough sleep, this restoration process is cut short. Adenosine levels remain elevated. ATP reserves don't get fully replenished, and you wake up, or rather, you're forced to wake up by an alarm clock, with your brain's energy systems already partially depleted. You're starting the day in an energy deficit, trying to run on reserves that never got properly restored. This shows up in measurable ways. Studies examining people after sleep deprivation consistently find that they exhibit something called psychomotor vigilance impairment. This is a fancy term for something very simple. They're slower to react, slower to process information, and more likely to have brief lapses in attention where they simply zone out for a few seconds. These aren't dramatic changes in most cases. We're talking about reaction times that are perhaps 100 or 200 milliseconds slower, attention lapses that last only seconds. But in the aggregate, Across an entire day, these small deficits add up to a profound sense of fatigue and reduced capability. The prefrontal cortex, that crucial region at the front of your brain responsible for executive functions, decision-making, and impulse control, is particularly sensitive to sleep deprivation. Brain imaging studies using positron emission tomography and functional MRI have repeatedly shown that sleep deprivation reduces metabolic activity in the prefrontal cortex. This region simply doesn't light up as brightly on brain scans when people are sleep deprived. It's working at reduced capacity, running on diminished energy. This matters because the prefrontal cortex is essentially your brain's CEO. It's the part that plans, organizes, maintains focus, overrides impulsive urges, and makes complex decisions. When it's energy deprived and functioning suboptimally, all of these executive functions suffer. You have trouble concentrating on complex tasks. Your mind wanders more easily, you make more mistakes. You feel mentally foggy, unable to think as clearly or quickly as you normally would. There's also evidence that sleep deprivation disrupts the delivery of energy to your brain. Your brain relies on a steady supply of glucose delivered through your bloodstream, and research suggests that sleep deprivation may impair glucose metabolism in the brain. Some studies have found that sleep-deprived individuals show altered patterns of glucose utilization in their brains, particularly in regions like the prefrontal cortex and thalamus. It's as if the distribution network for energy becomes less efficient when you're sleep-deprived, further compounding the problem of depleted reserves. But here's what makes this energy crisis particularly insidious. It's invisible. When you're sleep-deprived and struggling to focus on a work task, you don't feel your adenosine levels or think about your ATP reserves, or sense the reduced metabolic activity in your prefrontal cortex. You just feel tired. You feel like you're pushing through fog. You feel like everything requires more effort than it should. And often, you blame yourself. You think you should be able to concentrate better, try harder, push through. But the reality is that your brain is literally running on depleted energy reserves. It's not a matter of willpower or effort. It's a matter of basic biological fuel. This energy deficit affects more than just mental tasks. Your physical energy suffers too. Sleep deprivation reduces your capacity for physical activity, decreases your exercise performance, and makes physical tasks feel more effortful than they normally would. Studies of athletes have shown that sleep deprivation impairs everything, from running speed to accuracy in sports that require precision. Your muscles work less efficiently. Your cardiovascular system operates less effectively. Your entire body is running at reduced capacity. And there's a cruel irony here. One of the best ways to improve sleep is regular physical activity. But when you're sleep-deprived and exhausted, exercise is often the last thing you feel like doing. The energy deficit makes you less likely to move, which can then perpetuate poor sleep, which deepens the energy deficit. Another vicious cycle, another way that sleep deprivation feeds on itself. The subjective experience of this energy crisis is profound. Think about the last time you were seriously sleep-deprived. Maybe after a newborn kept you up all night, or after staying up late to meet a deadline, or during a period of insomnia. Remember how the world felt? How every task seemed to require twice as much effort? How you had to keep rereading the same paragraph because the words weren't sticking? How even simple decisions felt overwhelming? How your co-workers' voices seemed too loud, the fluorescent lights too bright, the ambient noise too distracting? This wasn't you being weak or dramatic. This was your brain operating with insufficient energy reserves, trying to maintain normal function while running on fumes. Your adenosine levels were elevated, signaling exhaustion. Your ATP reserves were depleted. The metabolic activity in your prefrontal cortex was reduced. You were experiencing the biological reality of energy deprivation at the cellular level, and it manifested as that awful feeling of dragging yourself through the day. What's particularly interesting is that this energy deficit isn't uniform across all brain regions or functions. Some types of tasks suffer more than others under sleep deprivation. Simple, routine tasks that you can do almost on autopilot, like brushing your teeth or driving a familiar route, remain relatively intact. But tasks that require sustained attention, complex problem-solving, or novel thinking suffer dramatically. This is because these higher-order cognitive functions rely heavily on the prefrontal cortex, which, as we've discussed, is particularly vulnerable to the energy crisis of sleep deprivation. Research using electroencephalography, EEG recordings that measure electrical activity in the brain, has shown that sleep deprivation produces something remarkable. Even while you're awake, parts of your brain start exhibiting the same slow-wave activity normally seen during deep sleep. It's as if exhausted neurons are trying to grab microseconds of rest, even while you're conscious and trying to function. These are called local sleep episodes, and they correlate with performance lapses. When certain brain regions briefly dip into a sleep-like state while you're trying to stay awake and alert, your performance on whatever you're doing suddenly drops. You might miss a signal, forget what you were doing, or lose your train of thought entirely. This phenomenon explains something many people have experienced. That strange feeling when you're severely sleep-deprived, where you seem to briefly zone out or go blank. You're not losing consciousness, but parts of your brain are essentially stealing moments of sleep-like recovery, desperately trying to restore some energy even in the midst of waking activity. It's a testament to how desperately your brain needs that restoration that comes from sleep. The relationship between sleep and energy is also bidirectional in interesting ways. We've talked about how insufficient sleep depletes energy, but having low energy during the day can also make it harder to sleep well at night. If you're exhausted but haven't expended enough physical or cognitive energy during the day, perhaps because you were too tired to exercise or engage in demanding mental work, you may find it harder to fall asleep at bedtime. Your body needs a certain level of energy expenditure during waking hours to build up enough sleep pressure for nighttime. It's a delicate balance, and chronic sleep deprivation can disrupt both sides of this equation. There's also emerging evidence that sleep deprivation may affect your mitochondria, those tiny organelles inside your cells that are often called the powerhouses because they produce ATP. Some research suggests that chronic sleep loss may impair mitochondrial function, potentially making your cells less efficient at energy production even when substrate, fuel, is available. This would create a double whammy: depleted energy reserves and reduced capacity to rebuild those reserves efficiently. The practical implications of this energy crisis are enormous. When you're sleep deprived, you're not operating at full capacity in any domain of life. Your work performance suffers because your cognitive resources are depleted. Your relationships suffer because you have less patience, less emotional bandwidth, less energy to fully engage with others. Your health suffers because you're too tired to exercise, too exhausted to prepare healthy meals, too depleted to make good decisions about self-care. The energy deficit touches everything. And unlike hunger, which can at least be temporarily satisfied by eating, there's no quick fix for the energy crisis of sleep deprivation. You can drink coffee, and it might make you feel more alert by blocking adenosine receptors, but it's a temporary illusion. The energy deficit remains. The adenosine keeps accumulating. The ATP reserves stay depleted. The only real solution is sleep. Not just any sleep, but sufficient quality sleep that allows for full energy restoration. Nothing else can truly substitute for that fundamental biological process. This is why shift workers, medical residents, truck drivers, and others who regularly experience chronic sleep deprivation show not just temporary fatigue, but sustained declines in cognitive performance, increased accident rates, and greater risk of health problems. They're not just tired in the moment, they're accumulating an energy debt that affects everything they do. The safety implications alone are staggering. Drowsy driving kills more people than drunk driving in some analyses, precisely because of this energy crisis affecting reaction time, attention, and decision-making. The control collapse. When your prefrontal cortex checks out now. So we come to the third corner of this triangle, and in many ways, the most devastating. The loss of self-control and decision-making ability that accompanies sleep deprivation. Because even if you're aware that you're hungrier than normal and that you're running on depleted energy, you might assume you can still make rational choices, still override your impulses, still maintain control. But this assumption crumbles under the weight of sleep deprivation research. Self-control is a function of your prefrontal cortex, that region we've already discussed as being particularly vulnerable to sleep loss. This area right behind your forehead is responsible for what neuroscientists call executive functions: planning, organizing, impulse inhibition, emotional regulation, and complex decision-making. It's the part of your brain that can say no to temptation, that can see beyond immediate gratification to longer-term consequences, that can override emotional impulses with rational judgment, and it's extraordinarily sensitive to sleep deprivation. Multiple brain imaging studies have shown that sleep deprivation reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, particularly in regions like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. These areas literally show decreased metabolic activity on PET scans after sleep loss. They're working less hard, processing less information, exerting less control over other brain regions. At the same time, sleep deprivation increases activity in emotion-related regions, like the amygdala. The amygdala is deep in your brain, part of what's sometimes called the limbic system, and it's involved in processing emotions, particularly strong emotions like fear, anger, and desire. Under normal, well-rested conditions, your prefrontal cortex maintains regulatory control over your amygdala. It's a top-down system. The rational, planning, controlling prefrontal cortex can modulate and dampen the emotional responses generated by the amygdala. But sleep deprivation disrupts this relationship. Studies led by researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, have shown that after sleep deprivation, the functional connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala weakens. These regions aren't communicating as effectively. The prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate the amygdala diminishes. Meanwhile, the amygdala becomes hyperactive, showing stronger responses to emotional stimuli. The result is a brain that's more emotionally reactive and less capable of regulating those emotional reactions. You're more likely to snap at someone over a minor annoyance. You're more likely to feel overwhelmed by stress that you could normally handle. You're more likely to make decisions based on immediate emotional responses rather than careful reasoning. The rational overseer has fallen asleep on the job, and the emotional responder is running the show. This shows up in decision-making studies in fascinating ways. When well-rested people make decisions, they tend to evaluate options relatively carefully, consider potential negative consequences, and make choices that balance immediate rewards against longer-term risks. Sleep-deprived people show a different pattern. They become more focused on potential gains and less attentive to potential losses. They show increased risk-taking behavior, particularly when there's a chance of immediate reward. They make more impulsive choices. One study examined this using a gambling task where participants had to make choices between safe, small wins and risky gambles that could result in either large wins or losses. After sleep deprivation, participants shifted toward the risky gambles, particularly when they were framed as potential gains. They were less influenced by the possibility of loss. Their decision-making became more focused on what could I get and less on what could I lose. This pattern extends beyond laboratory gambling tasks. Studies examining real-world decisions have found that sleep-deprived people are more likely to make poor financial decisions, more likely to engage in risky behaviors, and more likely to give in to temptations they would normally resist. That late-night online shopping spree? The impulsive text to an ex-partner at 2 a.m.? The decision to eat an entire pizza after getting home from the bar? These aren't just random bad choices. They're the result of a brain with compromised impulse control, where the prefrontal cortex that would normally say, "This is a bad idea," isn't functioning at full capacity. The link between sleep deprivation and self-control extends to emotional regulation as well. When you're well rested, you have a variety of strategies for managing difficult emotions. You might reframe a situation to see it more positively. You might distract yourself from unpleasant thoughts. You might consciously regulate your emotional response to maintain composure in a challenging situation. Research shows that sleep deprivation impairs all of these emotion regulation strategies. Studies using event-related potentials, a type of brain measurement that tracks neural responses to stimuli, have found that sleep-deprived people show less effective reappraisal, the ability to reframe situations, reduced capacity for distraction from negative emotions, and less successful suppression of unwanted emotional responses. Their emotion regulation toolkit essentially becomes less effective across the board. This manifests in daily life as increased irritability, heightened stress responses, and a general sense of emotional fragility. Things that normally wouldn't bother you suddenly feel intolerable. Minor frustrations become major upsets. You might find yourself crying over something relatively trivial or flying into a rage over a small inconvenience. This isn't personality change or mental illness. It's your brain's emotion regulation systems being compromised by sleep deprivation. There's also evidence that sleep deprivation specifically impairs moral judgment and ethical decision-making. Studies examining this have found that sleep-deprived people take longer to make decisions about ethical dilemmas, and when they do decide, they're more likely to choose options that favor personal benefit over ethical principles. The ability to integrate emotional responses with moral reasoning, a complex task that requires coordination between emotional brain regions and the prefrontal cortex, becomes impaired. One particularly interesting line of research has looked at social behavior under sleep deprivation. Multiple studies have found that sleep-deprived people become less effective in social interactions. They're less good at reading facial expressions and social cues. They're more likely to misinterpret neutral expressions as negative. They're less empathetic and less able to take another person's perspective. They show increased aggressive tendencies in competitive situations and reduced prosocial behavior in cooperative situations. In one fascinating study, researchers had participants play economic games designed to measure social behavior. After sleep deprivation, participants showed increased aggressive choices in competitive games and increased spiteful behavior, choosing options that hurt both themselves and their opponent rather than cooperating for mutual benefit. They also showed reduced trust of others and increased hostility toward perceived slights. Their social decision-making became less cooperative, less trusting, and more antagonistic. This isn't just academic research with no real-world relevance. These findings have profound implications for relationships, workplace dynamics, parenting, and any situation that requires emotional intelligence and behavioral control. When you're chronically sleep-deprived, you're more likely to damage your relationships through irritability and poor emotional regulation. You're more likely to make bad decisions at work through impaired judgment and increased risk-taking. You're more likely to exhibit poor impulse control in any domain of life. And here's where the three corners of our triangle really come together in a perfect storm of dysfunction. You're hungrier than normal because your appetite hormones are dysregulated. You're exhausted because your energy systems are depleted. And you have diminished self-control because your prefrontal cortex isn't working properly. These three factors interact in ways that multiply their individual effects. Let's walk through a concrete example. You had a bad night of sleep, maybe 4 or 5 hours. You wake up tired, with elevated ghrelin and decreased leptin, so you're hungrier than normal. Your adenosine levels are still high, and your ATP reserves are depleted, so your prefrontal cortex is already working at reduced capacity. You get through the morning on willpower and coffee, but by mid-afternoon, you're running on fumes. A co-worker brings cookies to the office. Under normal circumstances, well-rested, you might think, "Those look good, but I'm trying to eat healthily," and decline, or have just one. But sleep-deprived you is hungrier due to hormonal changes. Sleep-deprived you is also exhausted, which makes everything feel harder and makes immediate gratification more appealing. And crucially, sleep-deprived you has diminished prefrontal cortex function, which means your ability to override the impulse to eat multiple cookies is compromised. The hunger signals are stronger. The energy reserves for self-control are depleted. The control center itself is impaired. It's not surprising that you end up eating more cookies than you intended. Each individual factor would be challenging enough, but together they create a situation where healthy choices become exponentially more difficult. This same pattern plays out across countless daily decisions. Should you go to the gym after work or skip it? Should you meal prep healthy food or just order takeout? Should you respond thoughtfully to that annoying email or fire off a snippy reply? Should you be patient with your partner or snap at them over minor issues? In every case, sleep deprivation makes the harder, healthier, more productive choice more difficult by simultaneously increasing impulses and decreasing the capacity to control those impulses. Recent research has even found that prolonged exertion of self-control during waking hours can produce sleep-like activity in the prefrontal cortex. Extended practice with tasks requiring self-control, the kind of sustained willpower that everyone exercises throughout a normal day, is associated with increased low-frequency brain waves in the prefrontal regions, similar to the slow waves seen during sleep. It's as if the prefrontal cortex is trying to grab moments of rest, even while you're awake and trying to function. This has striking implications. It suggests that self-control isn't just harder after sleep deprivation. The act of exercising self-control throughout a sleep-deprived day may further deplete the prefrontal cortex, creating more sleep-like states in that very region, which then further impairs control. It's a downward spiral where using self-control depletes self-control when you're already operating on insufficient sleep. Meta-analyses examining the relationship between sleep and self-control have found consistent correlations. Both sleep quality and sleep duration are positively associated with self-control. People who sleep better report better self-control. People who sleep longer have better self-control. And when sleep is experimentally restricted, self-control consistently declines. This has been demonstrated across multiple domains. Self-control over eating decreases after sleep deprivation. Self-control over attention and distraction decreases. Self-control over emotional responses decreases. Self-control over impulsive behaviors decreases. It's not domain-specific. Sleep deprivation seems to impair the general capacity for self-regulation across different types of situations. And just as with the hunger and energy components, these effects accumulate with chronic sleep restriction. One night of poor sleep might slightly impair your self-control. A week of poor sleep creates a more substantial deficit. Months or years of chronic sleep restriction may lead to persistent impairments in impulse control and decision-making that affect every aspect of life. There's also evidence that certain personality factors and individual differences influence how severely sleep deprivation affects self-control. People who naturally have higher levels of self-control seem to maintain better function under sleep deprivation than those with naturally lower self-control. But everyone shows impairment. It's just a matter of degree. Sleep deprivation is an equal opportunity saboteur of self-control. It affects everyone, just to varying extents. The relationship between sleep and self-control also appears to be bidirectional. Just as poor sleep impairs self-control, impaired self-control can lead to worse sleep. People with poor self-control are more likely to engage in behaviors that disrupt sleep. Staying up late, scrolling through their phones, consuming caffeine too late in the day, maintaining irregular sleep schedules. This creates another vicious cycle where poor sleep undermines self-control, and poor self-control leads to behaviors that further worsen sleep. The vicious triangle. How these three forces reinforce each other. Now that we've examined each corner of this triangle, hunger dysregulation, energy depletion, and control collapse, let's look at how they interact and reinforce each other in ways that make sleep deprivation particularly insidious. Start with the hunger component. Your appetite hormones are dysregulated, so you're experiencing stronger cravings and less satiety. This would be challenging enough on its own, but it's compounded by the energy depletion. Because you're exhausted, you don't have the energy to prepare healthy meals. You're more likely to reach for convenient, high-calorie options that require minimal preparation. You're less likely to have the physical energy to go grocery shopping for healthy ingredients or to spend time cooking nutritious meals. The energy depletion also makes you less likely to exercise, which has multiple knock-on effects. Without regular physical activity, you don't expend as much energy during the day, which can make it harder to build up adequate sleep pressure for the following night. You also miss out on the appetite-regulating effects of exercise, which can help normalize hormone levels. And you lose the mood and cognitive benefits of physical activity, which might otherwise help compensate for some of the effects of sleep deprivation. Meanwhile, the control collapse means you're less able to resist those hunger cravings even when you know intellectually that giving in isn't the healthiest choice. Your prefrontal cortex, which would normally help you say, "I'm going to eat something healthy even though I'm craving junk food," isn't operating at full capacity. The rational part of your brain that could override immediate desires is compromised. This creates a scenario where you're hungrier than normal, too exhausted to make healthy food and less capable of resisting unhealthy options. Each factor makes the others worse. The hunger makes you more likely to eat high-calorie food. Eating high-calorie food provides temporary energy through blood sugar spikes, but these are often followed by crashes that leave you even more exhausted. The exhaustion further depletes your self-control. The depleted self-control makes you more likely to give in to hunger cravings. Round and round it goes. The control collapse also interacts with the energy deficit in particularly problematic ways. Making good decisions requires cognitive resources. Literally, it requires energy for your prefrontal cortex to function. When you're running on depleted energy reserves, decision-making becomes even more impaired. It's not just that your prefrontal cortex is inherently compromised by sleep deprivation, it's also that it lacks sufficient energy to operate effectively, even with the capacity it has left. This is why decision fatigue becomes so much more severe when you're sleep deprived. The cumulative effect of making decision after decision throughout the day depletes your already limited cognitive resources much faster. By evening, you might have essentially no self-control left, which is precisely why so many people end up making their worst food choices late at night after a day of sleep-deprived decision-making. The energy depletion also feeds back into sleep quality in complex ways. You might think that being exhausted would make it easier to sleep, but that's not always how it works. Chronic fatigue can actually disrupt sleep architecture, leading to lighter, less restorative sleep. Exhaustion can also increase stress hormones like cortisol, which can interfere with the ability to fall asleep and stay asleep. So the energy deficit doesn't just make you feel tired during the day, it can actively contribute to worse sleep at night, perpetuating the whole cycle. And then there's the emotional component. Sleep deprivation increases stress reactivity and emotional volatility, which creates stress, which makes it harder to sleep well. Stress affects the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the body's main stress response system, and can lead to elevated evening cortisol levels that interfere with sleep initiation. The stress also often leads to stress eating, the very behavior that's already been made more likely by hormonal changes and reduced self-control. Consider what this triangle looks like over the course of a typical day for someone who's chronically sleep-deprived. They wake up already tired, with disrupted hunger hormones and impaired prefrontal cortex function. They struggle through the morning on coffee and willpower, making increasingly poor decisions as their cognitive resources deplete. By lunchtime, they're starving, elevated ghrelin, exhausted, depleted ATP, and their self-control is hanging by a thread, impaired prefrontal function. They eat more than they intended, make poor food choices, and don't have the energy to go for a walk afterward. The afternoon is even worse. The post-lunch dip in energy combines with the already depleted state to create profound fatigue. Cognitive performance plummets. Emotional regulation becomes nearly impossible. By evening, they're so exhausted and depleted that even simple tasks feel overwhelming. They collapse on the couch, scroll mindlessly through their phone, eat snacks they don't really want but can't resist, and finally drag themselves to bed too late, perpetuating the sleep deprivation that started the whole cycle. And here's perhaps the cruelest irony: the very behaviors that might help break this cycle, exercising, preparing healthy meals, maintaining good sleep hygiene, managing stress effectively, all require energy, self-control, and good decision-making. These are precisely the resources that sleep deprivation depletes. It's like being stuck in quicksand. The harder you try to escape using the obvious methods, the deeper you sink, because you don't have the resources those methods require. This is why chronic sleep deprivation is so difficult to overcome once it becomes established. It's not just that you need to start sleeping better, it's that you need to simultaneously address the hunger dysregulation, the energy depletion, and the control collapse. All while those three factors are actively making it harder to do anything about them. You need to resist stronger hunger cravings with weaker willpower, while having less energy to prepare healthy alternatives. You need to exercise when you're exhausted. You need to make good decisions when your decision-making capacity is compromised. Breaking this cycle usually requires external support and strategies that work around the deficits, rather than trying to overcome them through sheer willpower. It requires recognizing that you're not just tired, but that you're dealing with genuine biological impairments across multiple systems. It requires compassion for yourself and realistic expectations about what you can accomplish in a sleep-deprived state. The research also suggests that these effects don't impact everyone equally. There are individual differences in resilience to sleep deprivation, likely influenced by genetic factors, age, overall health, and other variables. Some people maintain relatively good function on 5 or 6 hours of sleep, while others show significant impairment. But the key word is relatively. Even people who think they're functioning well on inadequate sleep typically show measurable deficits when tested objectively. There's also a troubling finding that people tend to be poor judges of their own impairment under sleep deprivation. Multiple studies have found that as sleep debt accumulates, subjective ratings of sleepiness and impairment tend to plateau, even though objective performance continues to decline. In other words, you get used to functioning in a sleep-deprived state and start to feel like you're doing okay. But when your actual performance is measured, it continues to deteriorate. You're not as functional as you think you are. This has serious implications for anyone in a position of responsibility. Parents making decisions about their children's well-being, healthcare providers caring for patients, drivers operating vehicles, leaders making important decisions. The person who's been sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night for months might feel like they've adapted, like they're doing fine, but their judgment, reaction time, and decision-making are likely significantly impaired. And because they don't accurately perceive their own impairment, they continue in positions where their compromised state could have serious consequences. The way forward: breaking free from the sleep deprivation trap. So what do you do with this information? If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in these descriptions of hunger dysregulation, energy depletion, and control collapse, what's the path forward? First, understand that you're not weak or broken. If you're struggling with cravings, low energy, and poor self-control after inadequate sleep, that's not a character flaw. It's a normal biological response to sleep deprivation. Your hormones are doing exactly what research predicts they'll do when you don't sleep enough. Your brain is responding exactly as brain imaging studies show it will respond. You're not uniquely lacking in willpower. You're fighting against powerful biological forces that are working against you. Second, recognize that there's no substitute for actual sleep. You can't supplement your way out of sleep deprivation. You can't caffeinate your way to restored function. You can't simply try harder or be more disciplined. The only real solution is getting sufficient quality sleep on a consistent basis. Everything else is just damage control. This might mean making sleep a priority in ways you haven't before. It might mean going to bed earlier, even if that means missing out on evening activities. It might mean addressing underlying sleep disorders like sleep apnea or insomnia with professional help. It might mean changing your environment to make it more conducive to sleep, darkening your bedroom, reducing noise, maintaining a cooler temperature. It might mean examining and changing habits that interfere with sleep: late-day caffeine, evening alcohol use, screen time before bed. For many people, this requires a fundamental shift in how they think about sleep. In a culture that often celebrates busyness and treats sleep as a luxury or a sign of weakness, making sleep a priority can feel countercultural. But the research is unambiguous. Adequate sleep isn't optional if you want to function optimally. It's not something you can consistently shortchange without consequences. Third, while you're working on improving your sleep, you can implement strategies to minimize the impact of the sleep deprivation you're currently experiencing. These aren't fixes, they're damage control, but they can help. For the hunger component, this might mean structuring your environment to support healthy eating, even when your appetite regulation is compromised. Don't rely on willpower to resist junk food. Just don't buy it in the first place. Prepare healthy snacks in advance so they're as convenient as unhealthy options. Eat on a regular schedule rather than waiting until you're ravenously hungry to decide what to eat, because by that point, your dysregulated appetite hormones and impaired self-control will make poor choices almost inevitable. For the energy component, work with your body's natural rhythms rather than fighting them. If you're exhausted in the afternoon, take a brief nap if possible, or at least take a break and do something restorative rather than trying to power through. Strategic use of caffeine early in the day in moderate amounts can help with alertness, but don't rely on it as a substitute for sleep. Consider exercise even when you don't feel like it, because movement can sometimes paradoxically increase energy levels, and it supports better sleep. For the control collapse, reduce the number of decisions you have to make and the amount of self-control you need to exercise. Use implementation intentions. If X happens, then I'll do Y, to plan in advance how you'll handle situations that require self-control, rather than trying to make good choices in the moment when your prefrontal cortex is compromised. Remove temptations from your environment. Ask for support from others. Don't beat yourself up when your self-control fails. Recognize that you're operating with impaired capacity and be compassionate with yourself. But again, all of these strategies are just ways to minimize damage while you address the real problem: insufficient sleep. They're not permanent solutions. If you're chronically sleep deprived, nothing will truly fix the hunger dysregulation, energy depletion, and control collapse except getting more sleep. For some people, this is relatively straightforward. Simply allocate more time for sleep. Go to bed earlier. Protect your sleep time as rigorously as you protect important meetings or appointments. Treat sleep as non-negotiable rather than the first thing that gets cut when life gets busy. For others, it's more complex. You might be dealing with insomnia, where you want to sleep but can't. You might have sleep apnea, where you're technically in bed for 8 hours, but the quality of your sleep is so poor that you're not getting restorative rest. You might be a shift worker whose schedule makes it nearly impossible to get consistent, high-quality sleep. You might be a new parent dealing with nighttime wakings that are beyond your control. In these cases, getting professional help becomes important. Sleep disorders are incredibly common and remarkably treatable. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is highly effective and doesn't involve medications. CP, AP therapy for sleep apnea can be life-changing. Working with a healthcare provider who takes sleep seriously can make an enormous difference. The research on all of this, the hunger dysregulation, the energy depletion, the control collapse, isn't just interesting academic information. It has real implications for how we structure our lives and our society. School start times that force teenagers to wake up before their circadian biology is ready to wake. Those contribute to sleep deprivation and all its consequences. Workplaces that implicitly or explicitly reward long hours and insufficient sleep, they're setting their employees up for impaired performance, poor health, and burnout. Cultural attitudes that treat sleep as laziness or self-indulgence, they're contributing to a population that's chronically sleep-deprived and functioning below capacity. At an individual level, understanding these mechanisms can help you make more informed choices. When you know that sleep deprivation will make you hungrier, lower your energy, and impair your self-control, you can plan accordingly. You can recognize that your struggles aren't personal failings, but biological responses to insufficient sleep. You can prioritize sleep not as a luxury, but as a fundamental need, as essential as food or water. The science is clear. Sleep isn't just rest, it's active restoration of critical systems throughout your body and brain. It's hormonal recalibration. It's energy replenishment. It's neural maintenance. When you shortchange sleep, you're not just tired, you're operating with impaired appetite regulation, depleted energy reserves, and diminished self-control. These three impairments interact and reinforce each other, creating a downward spiral that affects every aspect of your life. The good news is that sleep restoration works. When you prioritize sleep and consistently get adequate, quality rest, these systems can normalize. Your appetite hormones can rebalance, your energy reserves can restore, your prefrontal cortex can regain its capacity for control and decision-making. The triangle of dysfunction can become a triangle of function. Closing thoughts. We've covered a lot of territory tonight, from the hormonal chaos that makes you ravenously hungry after poor sleep, to the cellular energy crisis that leaves you exhausted and foggy, to the prefrontal cortex impairment that strips away your self-control and decision-making capacity. These three forces, hunger dysregulation, energy depletion, and control collapse, don't just coexist, they actively reinforce each other, creating a vicious cycle that makes sleep deprivation far more than just feeling tired. What makes this particularly challenging is that these effects are largely invisible. You can't feel your leptin dropping or your ghrelin rising. You can't sense your ATP being depleted or your adenosine accumulating. You can't directly perceive the reduced activity in your prefrontal cortex. All you know is that you're hungrier than you should be, more exhausted than seems reasonable, and struggling with self-control in ways that make you question yourself. But now you know what's really happening. You understand the biological mechanisms at play. You can recognize that your struggles aren't personal failings, but predictable responses to insufficient sleep. And perhaps most importantly, you know that the solution exists. Prioritizing adequate, quality sleep doesn't just make you feel less tired. It restores the hormonal balance that regulates your appetite, replenishes the energy systems that power your body and brain, and revitalizes the prefrontal cortex that gives you self-control and good judgment. In a world that often devalues sleep, that treats it as something to be minimized or optimized away, understanding these mechanisms can be transformative. Sleep isn't an inconvenience or a waste of time. It's the foundation that makes everything else possible. Without it, you're fighting hunger with depleted willpower while running on empty. With it, you're operating as your body was designed to operate, with balanced hormones, adequate energy, and intact self-control. The choice, ultimately, is yours. But now, it's an informed choice, grounded in an understanding of what's really at stake when you shortchange your sleep. The hunger, the exhaustion, the loss of control, these aren't inevitable parts of modern life. They're consequences of a choice you can change. If you found this exploration helpful, if it's given you insight into your own experiences with sleep and its effects, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We explore these intersections of health, science, and optimal living regularly, always with an eye toward understanding the mechanisms beneath the surface and finding paths toward better function and well-being. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Sleep well and take care of yourself. Your hunger, your energy, and your control depend